want to count down or you want to just start? Yeah, okay, fine. My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to welcome you to today's dialogue with LaRouche. This is a special session of our normal Saturday meeting, and we're going to try to get as quickly as we can to the questions and answers because we are going to be hearing from the same person who gave the keynote address at our February conference, which was the first conference that we had after the death of Lyndon LaRouche, the leader and founder of this organization. Before I introduce him, I want to say just a few things about the moment that we find ourselves in. We have many pieces of literature that we always publish, but there is a statement by Helga Sepp LaRouche that we took as a kind of motto. This is an unbelievable historic moment. We must change the agenda completely. And that will be the purpose of today's discussion, not just to discuss why we have to do that, but how we will do that. Much of the American media has attempted to preoccupy people with a story concerning impeachment of the president. There was a more important story that was evolving at the beginning of the week, and the stage for that story happened to be the United Nations. Executive Intelligence Review's latest issue has a cover, 130 banks grab for dictatorship as system crumbles. What's important about some of the things we are going to recount to you today in their entirety is that none of the things that are being proposed by these people will actually work. But there is a very important reason for which you should know what it is that they are planning and why they think it will work. We're not going to take a lot of time, but we want to indicate a few of these things. The governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who had spoken a few weeks earlier in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and had talked about the idea of regime change in the international financial system, also spoke here in New York on Monday. He was one of the opening acts of the climate change summit that occurred one day before President Trump spoke at the United Nations. And essentially, the message of the bankers is that they intend to kill several billions of people over the short term, and they refer to this as vigorous action to defend the planet against climate change. And what they're going to do, and it was Bloomberg who stated this on Wednesday at a follow-up meeting that he held, which was attended by the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, as well as Hank Paulson and Christine Lagarde. I want to say something about both of those people in just a minute. But at that follow-up, what Bloomberg announced is that he and other bankers intended to shut down all new coal plant production by the year 2020. That would be next year. That they had already successfully eliminated half of the coal plants in America, and they intended to eliminate the rest. And as various people have noted, if you were to try to do anything like that, you would immediately basically consign the population of Africa in particular to execution. Because if you look around the world at where people have to use coal as a fuel, there are certain areas of the world that have to do that. Now, this is not a surprise. It isn't a surprise in the conception. So what we are going to do, we've used to talk about something called banker's arithmetic. Dennis Small is fond of talking about that In this case, we're going to talk about bankers' ecology. The bankers have an idea of a green movement, but the idea of the green movement they're talking about was featured in a 1960s film called Soylent Green. They mean it, and they intend to do it. Their purpose is to eliminate several billion people from the planet. And they intend to create a kind of shock troop force that will enhance the ability of the banking class to do that. Many things could be said, but this is not important. It's important only as a way of identifying something. The banking system has cannibalized itself already. It was bailed out in 2008 by placing the international debt on the backs of the American and many other people. And that was done by Hank Paulson and Christine Lagarde, who were at this meeting that I referred to. Michael Bloomberg has long entertained delusions of the presidency of the United States. We referred to him, actually, it was Lyndon LaRouche who referred to him as Mausolini, because he's sort of a little mousy guy who is a very, very nasty character if you aren't watching him. And he can be very, very dangerous in that regard. We were able to confront these people. Daniel Burke and others confronted directly Christine Lagarde and Mark Carney as they exited the Plaza Hotel where the Bloomberg meeting was taking place. The next day, that is after the Monday speech that Mark Carney made, Donald Trump spoke at the United Nations, and although there are many things one could say about that speech, the important thing we want to focus on is only one statement he made, which is that the future does not belong to the globalists. The future belongs to the patriots. Now, while some might try to say that Donald Trump might have been referring to the Boston football team, he wasn't. In the same way, people tried to say that the president had such a bad sense of geography that he mistakenly said during his United Nations speech that Ukraine is a buffer state between Russia and the United Kingdom. He did say that, and he meant that. This is a crucial element of our entire story, and now we're going to just cut to the conclusion of what I have to say to just give a sense of this. The Bank of England and the City of London financial interests have something they call the Green Finance Institute. This has been for many years intent upon distorting and disorienting, particularly the nation of China, but other nations, on the question of ecology and the idea of climate change and what has to be done about it. In the recent period, we have published a particular report, which I don't have right in front of me, but it's a report that goes through and debunks thoroughly the entirety of that argument. The reason that this is crucial, and crucial to what we're about to talk about, in part, and why we asked that Jacques Cheminade speak to us today, is that there's a broader idea here that we have to understand we find ourselves confronting, and we're on a stage much larger than that of the mere earth and of the mere present. We're on neither of those stages. There's something that we're involved in, and it involves the conception of man. At the time of the American Revolution, the conception that governed in the world, in the governments of the world, was that man was a beast. There were no countries where that conception was not a hegemonic conception, except by dint of the existence of some great leader as an individual person. But there was no formal constitutional recognition of humanity. The first time that that was achieved, there were elements, as for example, the Treaty of Westphalia, but the first time in constitutional form that conception really became that which dominated a nation was in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, that the phrase that talks about the inalienable rights of man, that says what it says concerning the fact that these rights can't be given to you, they can't be given to you, they can't be taken away from you. They are inalienable. You can't alienate yourself from your rights as a human being. That's your responsibility. As according to that Declaration of Independence, mankind has a responsibility to be independent, to be free. Freedom is a choice in one sense, but if you are wished to be human, you have no choice except to be free. The oligarchies of Europe, such as the oligarchies that still exist, for example, in Sweden and in Denmark and in Belgium and in the United Kingdom, all these places that have these funny people and these funny outfits, hearkening back to old groups like Parliament Funkadelic and things like that. These people and their parade are a carnival that humanity can no longer afford. They have a conception of mankind that they've tried to impose and are right now trying to impose on the U.S. Congress. I mean, they have the United States Congress talking about impeaching the President of the United States because the people that are working for him are doing an investigation in which they've now discovered that the United States illegally and criminally aided and abetted a group of Nazis to come to power in Ukraine. That's what's actually going on. And because his investigators have discovered something that will cause them to discover what I just said, the Congress of the United States thinks it's going to impeach the president. We've written something which is on our website called Some Plain Facts Bearing on the Impeachment. It's an extensive analysis. It's going to be followed by other analyses. And what I want to say about that is that the American people are going to be called upon by us to impeach the Congress, not the president. See, the notion is that everybody in the Congress that's going along with the idea that there even should be a discussion of impeachment for the charges that they've brought, all of those people, no matter what else they may have accomplished, are suspect. And all of them have to be held accountable. The entire congressional body. And what we are going to do is we're going to activate what we've been calling for a while our committees of correspondence to cause that message to be brought to the Congress over the next 2 weeks because they're no longer in session, they're back in their districts, and we are urging everybody that will see this webcast today to go to our website and look there for various materials and various directions that we'd like to provide. Also, there are other ways to get in touch with us through our organization. We have weekly conference calls where we discuss the organizing process, and if you're interested in that, just go to the website and you will be directed as to what you have to do for that. The reason that I specifically requested that Jacques speak to us was not because there was just the United Nations General Assembly and we were talking about some things that were international, and not because he was part of a team that recently visited China and he has an important report. That wasn't the reason. Jacques, who has headed our French organization for many decades now, gave a presentation many years ago about Napoleon Bonaparte, and he explained the true nature of fascism, that Bonaparte was a fascist, but that this came out of a French ideological flaw, and he was only one side of the expression of fascism, that Jacobinism is also fascist. Now that was something that was a bit of a revelation for some people at that time. It's important because there's something called synarchy. The synarchy refers to the notion of a form of government above government involving banks, churches, sometimes unions, and intelligence agencies, policemen. And what you get is you get a form in which the society no longer has the option or the recourse to control anything meaningful in government. Now, this is not going to work, and there's a reason that we want this to be clear to everybody before we start talking. We're going to be talking about dangers. For example, the financial system is about to collapse. You have this business about impeachment is not actually going to remove the President of the United States. There are reasons for that we can talk about, but that's not going to happen. Right? And there are several other things that we can talk about. But if you've been noticing what's been happening with the not legalization of drugs, but the dispensing of drugs, like the opioids, and then people say, oh, we didn't realize that was going to happen, and we would end up killing more people through opioids every year than died in the entire Vietnam War. That was just a mistake. When you realize you're in a society in which people are prepared to accept these kinds of behaviors, you see, then they say, but I don't understand what this is for. I can answer that. All of this is for destruction. It's not for victory. These people are not trying to be victorious. They are simply trying to destroy. That's all. That's the objective. Why? Because that is their form of rule. Destruction. It's what's called the theory of the beast man. Joseph de Maistre talked about that. And again, Jacques and others were the first, together with Lyndon LaRouche, to call our attention to this as an organization. So I'd like to now, without any further remarks, have you hear from Jacques, and we'd like to engage in a frisky dialogue with you about these matters and about how what needs to be done can be done. So, Jacques?
So, good evening to all of you. I'm very happy to be with you. We are in a total crisis. It's global, with an everything bubble. And this is happening in the context of the collapse of the world financial system. The British, when they are cornered, they spread crises, conflicts, wars. And this is what's happening, what's defined the present situation. And what they call responsibility to protect is the right to kill. It was obvious in the Iraq war. It's much worse now. So these people work on the manipulation of the minds at the same time that they manipulate the conflicts in the world. Manipulation of the minds, you have to understand them as embezzlers, conjurers, and criminal hustlers. This is what they are, and what Dennis referred as a synarchy is a gang of these people working on behalf of the powers that are involved in what they call themselves at some point a controlled disintegration of the world. And when the power is threatened, they manage or they try to be on top of this disintegration. This is what has to be understood, and it's a key point to be understood to understand what's happening today. You have the financial aspect of it, which is all these associations of these groups of people. You can call it the modern synarchy, with all these people together in different networks, a network for greening the financial system, the high-level expert group on sustainable finance, the Green Finance Institute, controlled by the City of London and Wall Street. So you have all these financial institutions who want to be on top of this controlled disintegration. That's their plan. It's insane. It could not work because it's based on destruction, but it's their plan and it's what they want to impose. Then you have the mental brainwashing, what they do against the population. to create the conditions where there would be a minimal resistance to what they are doing. So they spread the idea, and it was constant in this circle historically, the idea that man is evil, that man is a beast. Man is a polluter, is a looter, and this is what the poor Greta Thunberg has expressed at United Nations and its various points of the world, expressing what was put in her mouth. Man is not a creative individual for them. A creative individual is danger, means danger for them. So they are treating people like children, manipulated children, and they are treating children to manipulate people that they want to manipulate as if they were children. So that's all the story of what's happening today. It was called at some point in Germany the Wandervogel, it was called the Hitlerian youth, it was called some names in the worst periods of Stalinism in Russia. This is to play on the youth, to peddle their line, and pretending that it comes from this innocent youth. So this is what's falling on us today. The Climate Week of Action, is exactly the expression of that. It is not what has to be understood, and the key point, it is not about ecology, it is not about environment, it is about depopulation, it's about the right to kill, to create conditions where they would maintain their power. And it was expressed in his own way by Guterres, the General Secretary of the United Nations, when he said that nature is angry. So it means angry, it means that this thing that he calls nature wants human sacrifice. So this is not nature, of course. It's this gang of people that I told you about. So it's very clear in the words of Bernie Sanders, for example. He unfortunately expressed this in a very clear way when he said that he admitted that he agrees with the idea that the population reduction is going to be necessary if we continue to do what we are doing and to go in a different direction. Population reduction is needed. Then Kevin Anderson, which is the mentor of Greta Thunberg and manipulator of Greta Thunberg. What he says exactly in 2009, November 3, 2009, is the following. He said, the consequences of climate change are terrifying. It's terrible. But I think it's extremely unlikely that we would not have mass deaths at 4 degrees, increased of 4 degrees. If you have got a population of 9 billion by 2050, and you hit 4 degrees, 5 degrees, 6 degrees, you might have 5 billion people surviving. So he means a reduction of the world population to 5 billion people. And it's expressed in his own way. He pretends he's inspired by reality with a statistical analysis, but it's exactly the way, without any creative input, how the oligarchy proceeds to manipulate people, creating this climate, this is a climate of the oligarchy, climate of fear and pessimism. Then, what we have in the immediate short term, and I think it's important to see and to understand the symptom of it. You have in the immediate, what happened immediately in the United States, it's the famous repo crisis. You know that in the usual way of functioning of the system, banks lend to each other overnight money. Those that are losing money and those that are gaining money and making money compensate each other overnight. So this thing usually works among these people. But suddenly, there was a crash of this system. All of a sudden, there was no money to compensate. So the Federal Reserve had to intervene. And they are pumped in 53 billion, then 75 billion, then 100 billion, and probably what is said is that it should continue until October 10, and if necessary, it will continue after. And if you measure what they are saying in the first step, it's more than 1 trillion. So this is absolutely insane, because you are intervening to allow a system which is cannot survive. You are giving this system a sort of last ditch of money to survive, and with all the destruction, of course, connected to this way to proceed. So what is a symptom of how this crisis is at the final stage is that Federal Reserve apparently had not anticipated what was going to happen, and they had to do it basically overnight. So at this point, it means that all the central banks are at loss, and what they're trying to do is to create fake money on top of the money that they throw on the markets and in the banks. They are trying to create in United Nations something called SDRs, special drawing rights. This is a one world money, and it's the present version of John Maynard Keynes' Bancor after World War II. So what Keynes wanted by creating this Bancor was to control the world economy on behalf of the people I told you about. So it did not work. There was a Bretton Woods system with all its imperfections, but it worked because it was based on production and relative development. Probably it was not equal development, it was not, but there was a development, a basis for development. Then they want to create now cryptocurrencies. And I warn you, this Libra from Facebook, it's probably even more dangerous than the SDRs. Even in France, people that are not revolutionaries are opposing it, saying it's a danger for the world. So even the French economic minister, who is not a nice guy, said it. So at this point, they have all this fake money, and to support all this new Green Deal. It's fake money for a new Green Deal, and to try to continue in that way. It could not work because it's not based on reality, but it's the idea to continue control a process of disintegration. So in this situation, you should see reality with the eyes of reason and see it in order to intervene and commit all you have, commit yourself, the best of yourself, to fight against this process, because you are fighting crime. It's like you were fighting crime in a street. So the street being here the world. So it means another policy, space policy. The space policy creates a situation where you have a science driver for the whole economy, this you know, but at the same time it's created among people working in the space program, it creates a sense of shared principle of the common interest of humanity, and to discover and to be challenging your creative powers, because you have to deal with your unknown. So I was very interested when I saw that in China, some friends of mine told me so, that in China all the people involved in this space are in the space community are between 30 and 40 years old, and they're all enthusiastic like they were in the NASA in the years. So now in the past years of the Kennedy period. Now what is clear is what with Trump and his Artemis program and Bridenstine intervention, Bridenstine, the head of NASA, something is going in the same direction. So you see what happens immediately. The US House in Congress with a Democrat majority cuts this program, 1.6 billion, and then it's reduced in half by the Senate. So at this point, it has absolutely to be reestablished, because this Artemis program is exactly the driver that not only the United States, but the world scientific community and the peoples in the world absolutely need to define a future where you have the production needed to develop every human being. So some people don't understand it. They said, well, we should first deal with things on Earth and not go to space. And a lot of pessimistic Europeans tend to say that today, even among the Yellow Vests movement in France. So what you have to understand is the unity of the human mind into a process of discovering, creating, connected to a society where you have a win-win basis. And this has to be something in the future, dealing with the future with the common good, the general welfare, taking and expressed in a real form in the universe, which is discovering what has not yet been discovered. So this is a process, and this has to be understood from space policy, thermonuclear fusion, and all a system that will be organized around that. This is what it's meant as a new Bretton Woods, what we mean as a new Bretton Woods, with a credit policy financing this development for the future. So it means a credit policy is an anticipation of the future for the common good, while a money policy, which is what this oligarchy is working with, is based on greed first, and then progressively in the process of destruction that we are facing now. So this has to be understood to understand the importance of what Donald Trump said at the United Nations. He said, as Dennis referred to, the future does not belong to the globalists, but to the patriots. This is key because the notion of national sovereignty associated with the process of development is absolutely something that is the only basis for world peace and world development in the future. Then he also said the United States, excuse me if my English isn't perfect or that of my American is imperfect, the United States does not look for a conflict with any other country. So it means that it stops this idea of the responsibility to protect this fake human rights concept, and it's a true human rights to develop the people and to advance into the future. This is a potential. Of course, Trump may have said a few things that I don't agree with, that are contradictory. He may have developed unnecessary brawls, but you have to see the essential. We are at a point of the world situation where you have to see the key. And the key is that Trump defines these two things that I said, which means connected to the Artemis program, connected to what he says about the future of the United States, which is something that revives a sense of a true American presidency. You have to understand that, and if you look at the Democrats, you see that there is no alternative. So you should lead a war against those who are preventing the United States and preventing the world to become a world of development, of peace, and instead are playing the game of the oligarchy. And we have to stop this game of the oligarchy. This is a basis for our intervention at this point of history across the oceans, I must say. So, what is key is to understand that in that context, if you look also at what's happening in Europe, Europe is a hodgepodge. It's a hodgepodge with bats, and his smell is quite bad. Because what is occurring now? There is a big discussion in the European Central Bank with people going for easy money, saying we are going to spread money, and spread money in the way Mario Draghi did it until now, spread money for the oligarchy, and continue to behave as criminal embezzlers. Then on the other side, you have people who are in favor of a rigor mortis economies. Jans Weidmann or François Villeroy de Galhau, the French French head of the central bank and the German head of the central bank, who all say we are for a policy where there should not be any credit for the future. And so you have these people that say no credit for the future, and the Draghi people who said credit for the banks. So it's sheer insanity, and the common denominator of them all is social austerity and an ability to create a world for a future with peace. They are committed to social austerity because they see that as something which is inside the universe. They have no sense of what a physical economy is, and also, if you look at the European Union, they are giving millions to George Soros and its network of no good organizations. You have that. So what Trump and, I must say, China are doing, and that's why an association of United States and China is so important, together with India and Russia, is what is for us what we should develop and at the same time inspire with, as you said so many times in these meetings, the LaRouche 4 laws. So it's very important to keep that in mind, to organize people that are going in the right direction, but not necessarily with clear views, to go with that. It's very important, in particular, in the United States today, because the main flaw in the Trump policy is Wall Street. And he cannot do it outside of Wall Street at this point. So our intervention would create the conditions where he will be able to do it outside of the world of Wall Street, in the tradition of Hamilton, in the tradition of Roosevelt, and in the tradition of Lyndon LaRouche, his 4 laws. So this, we have to free Trump, in that sense, of the people that are around him and play on what he's impulsing the world towards. And in that sense, we have very little in Europe. For example, Macron could say in France good things about the French-Russian relations, but at the same time, he promotes the ecological transition, and he's going fully on the side of the ecologists. So it's a situation where your responsibility in the United States is key, because it's the place where the orientation of the world economy, the world world thinking, the world morality, it's there that it could work against the oligarchy. And you are at the center of the battle. It doesn't mean that in other parts of the world it's not important. It's very important to associate ourselves. And the key is to understand the development, the miracle, the Chinese miracle. So the Chinese miracle, what it means. The Chinese started after Maoism to think that they had to go in an absolutely different direction. But they had no choice. So they decided to attract foreign capital to China to create the basis of development. There was no capital in China to organize this development. And through this capital input, and in particular, American companies and some German companies and a few French German companies invested in China. So with that, they rightly so, however a country wanted to develop, they absorb the technology of more advanced than the Chinese technology. They absorb this technology, attracting the capital, the foreign capital. But in order not to be controlled, and in order that this would go in a direction of a real development for the country, they had to do a few things. So what they did is first to control everything that would be necessary for the functioning of the country. So the banks, they have a sort of Glass-Steagall in China, where the state orients the public credit towards the real economy and not speculation. They have insurance companies, they have transport, and they have also the bet on nuclear energy. Of course, the development was based on coal, it was based on gas, it was based on that. But now, on hydroelectric, the Three Gorges Dam. But now they go into nuclear energy. And they have been cooperating with the French. That's a very interesting area. And the Chinese were the first ones to manage to open these new nuclear plants, to Tashan 1 and Tashan 2, before even the French were able to open their own plants. My country is still trying to do it. So the Chinese managed to do it first. They also decided to control the sector of communication and information, and to create for that the things that they would associate with the physical economy and not separated from the physical economy, which is the famous Bakst, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi. So associated with the physical economy, not as a separate from the physical economy as it has developed, unfortunately, in Silicon Valley. So then they developed networks, organizing these networks, in particular with the diaspora, at the level of the nation. China is very big, so you have to understand. The Chinese, when they speak, they have different way of speaking, so they don't understand each other from different parts of China. So they have to understand each other with the written material, so they understand themselves with poetry and science. That's a very important point to understand, that they have these programs of science for young students and young people who ask questions to old professors in the TV, and they have also a program of poetry where young people give some presentations about the classical Chinese poetry. So you have that. They understood that it was a basis for that in the framework of the whole Confucian tradition, which is and comes into the Xi Jinping speeches with the conception of the win-win system, inclusivity, which means that everybody should be associated with that, and connectivity, which means that it should spread in all regions of China. So they have put that at a world level, and that's a very interesting point. The economical takeoff, they think of it now at a world level, and to develop the domestic economy, and at the same time that they developed in the world. It's a new Silk Road, or one belt, one road conception. It's an overall strategy. So this comes very naturally as something that should be involved the United States and China. Why? And this is, I intervened in China to mention it. It says, if you go to the very basis of what we need, you see that China, the United States, and also France, had a common enemy, the British Empire. And we have all suffered under the British Empire. When we forget it, we become associate and we become destructive. When we understand that we should fight it and we organize ourselves to fight it, then we create a future for the world. And I think this way to understand things is very interesting. The Chinese were very interested by this conception because they have not a clear understanding of what the British Empire is. We have a much better understanding, of course, than the Chinese, and we have to create this exchange of ideas, information, people, and that's why it's so necessary that the Chinese who work in the United States could remain in the United States, and that the Europeans and the Americans that are in China could also be in China. And we have this exchange because at this point the challenge is a world challenge, and it's no more a challenge restricted to one country. The concept of nation, as Lyndon LaRouche developed it many times, is not a fixed conception. It's a conception which is involved in a change in the conditions of the world economy. And this is, and the world conscience. We know much more about the other than before, and than many years ago. And we can work in the advantage of the other, and we have means for the future which are incredibly better than many years ago. So why keep this oligarchy? We have to get rid of these oligarchs and organize ourselves and the world with a conception of being a patriot and a world citizen at the service of our nation, and our nation at the service of humanity. If we have that, we define a future. If not, we may not have a future. So it's very interesting in that conception that here in the United States, you organize these committees of correspondence. Also, in France, we organize a Society of Friends. Society of Friends is something that was created just before the French Revolution. It collapsed after the French Revolution, inside the process of the French Revolution, who did not work too well, as you know. So you have this Society of Friends, which corresponds to the committees of correspondence. We had our General Assembly of our Solidarité et Progrès movement. We have a General Assembly on a Friday evening. Then on Saturday, we had a day of action and mobilization with presentations and questions and answers, very intense this time. And on Sunday, we deployed with squads throughout Paris. But we want, with the Society of Friends, to go further than Paris and to develop inside the whole nation. And this sense of friendship, which is based, I think, on what in the ancient Greece was called philia. Philia is a sense that you have a friend of the other, and together we can trust each other and accomplish things for the future. And with this concept of philia in the Society of Friends and the committees of correspondence, the Société d'Amis, as we call it in France, we can develop steps towards agape and create the conditions for agape, which is the service of humanity. In each of us, the enthusiasm to do the good for the advantage of the other, what the Chinese call, in that sense, a win-win, evolving towards a world conception of a community of principle in the different projects of humanity. So this is what is before us, and the United States and China have necessarily to do it together, whatever the discrepancies today. So it's a challenge, it's a big challenge, and it's precisely a sense where this would secure for Trump to be in the future the man who has created the conditions for that. And for that, it's our job, it's our commitment, it's our way of acting in the universe today to do the best for it to be accomplished. It means that also we believe in the future, and we let's say fight against this pessimism. It takes different forms, and the suicidal approach of Greta Thunberg and those that are manipulating her. It should be an optimism, thinking that each human being in this universe has a right and the potential to become a decisive factor for the future. So we have no right to let this world being as it is. And I would say, if we do what is necessary, there are going to be no limits to growth in our countries, in each of our countries, and in the entire world. And as somebody said, and you know who said it, in ways that we cannot even imagine for the future. So I think that we need to have this concept with one fist across the oceans, and I would say much more than that, one mind working together as representatives of our respective nations in the interest of the common principles of humanity. And the world that we are entering it gives us a tremendous possibility, a tremendous potential, and at the same time, the oligarchy is destroying it. So it should be very clear, our task should be very clear. We have to create in the world this sense of the future, of the accomplishment, and the working together with a Glass-Steagall, a new Bretton Woods, a national bank, fusion, space, and overall, a creative conception of man which responds to the creation of the universe. And then the laws of the universe and our laws in society will coincide and create the conditions for the future. That's what I wanted to say, and that's my hope. And to see us in our fight, having been alive for so long, means that this decisive moment of history, we are here, but we should make it to be really here with many others around us, organized for the future.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Jacques. Now we're going to open up the floor. We're ready for questions. You'll have to use this microphone. So you come up here to ask your question. Do we have questions, first of all, right now? Because I have one I'll start with, because I have one for Jacques, and others can just come up, okay? So I guess what we'll do, there's a seat here, so if anybody wants to come, and there you can, so we don't have to wait for you to come around. Jacques, I'd like you to do something, which is to tell people about your most recent presidential campaign, because I think that people in America, they hear what you're saying, but then they realize that you're campaigning around this idea of an American alliance, but it's in France. So if we flipped it around, I campaigned for that every day in France, in the United States for France, it would be hard. But in that campaign in particular, they tried to ridicule you around your discussion of space. And also, you were, I think, the only truly pro-American candidate in that race. So I just wanted you to give people sort of a sense of what happens when you campaign, when you're doing politics in France, so that they have a sense of the contrast to hear.
Well, when I came to the United States, I must say that I did not know what America was, and I learned it. And the true America, the America of Hamilton, of Lincoln, Roosevelt, and LaRouche, is this true America that is in my heart, is fully in my heart. And as de Gaulle said once, he said that we should be together with our allies in all the challenges that we are facing. But at the same time, we should tell the truth to our allies. So in that sense, I think the true America is in each of you, and you have to make it present in the whole policy of your nation and create the conditions where this fight against the British Empire that we share would be on both sides of the Atlantic. This America that I discovered was not known by the French community in the United States. What these people said about the United States, 80% liked a fake America. They liked jazz, they liked the consumption, they liked consumption in a sense of things that you buy and this thing, and also they liked all this power, this financial power, what the fake America. 20% of the people were against America also for the whole wrong reasons. So the ones that were for America, and the ones who were against America were all for good reasons because they did not know American history. What I learned through the LaRouche organization is American history. And the best of it, I tried to bring it back to France because it corresponds to the best of the French history. Immediately, we had, and I must mention it, probably some of you don't know, letters from the FBI in the United States warning the American ambassador in Paris and telling him that a person with these ideas was trying to organize a movement in France and that this movement should be prevented to act. They sent this message to Paris, Rome, and Berlin, but in particular for me. So I made it, and I think that in a certain sense, we put in France on the table the main issues for the country, and this is known. The attack against us on the space policy, trying to ridicule me, has failed. So, because now everybody is speaking about the space, not only last July, but now it becomes in the whole in the whole debate, public debate, a key question, at least here, associated with nuclear energy. So what they have to say about me now is that he is old, he's a visionary, and he is not fit for politics because he is not willing to compromise and he's not willing to associate himself with what they see as reality. So it's precisely this sense of seeing into the future, fighting for the good of humanity, which this oligarchy cannot stand. So there are a lot of people who would not side with the oligarchy here in France, but they would not fight against it. So these people, in a sense, had a certain type of protection for me and what I did. So, but they did not went in the full support, and they did not understand that it was a card to be played. Instead, they saw it as a kind of voice that was speaking in the desert and not a voice that was speaking to people. So, of course, this idea did not work. And we have a lot of people that I meet in the streets every time I organize in the field. We have a lot of people who said, oh, we know you, you did well, we liked what you said, but it's impossible, but it's too far-fetched, is not something, it's too good to be true. So what we have to convince people is what is good has to be true, and that the human being, our humanity, is defined by that. And among us, those that tasted a drop of the cup of Gethsemane in the United States, those, they know it better, and they should maintain that and explain that and fight for that with the others. And I think that we are at the point of history where it's becoming social. So I think that that defines what I tried to do here. And people pretend that in the elections, the results were not paying, as they say. That's not the point. I think in the minds of people, it has already worked, and it's a, let's say, potential for the future that do exist across the ocean.
Hello, Jacques. This is Sylvia. I wanted to concur with what you just said about this idea that people say it's too good to be true, like the idea of fusion energy, for example. You know, we have young people who come up and say that sounds really good, but is it ever going to happen? But what I wanted to ask you is, given that France has a history of developing nuclear power compared to other nations, I know Germany has had a lot of nuclear plants. They shut them down, but you know, I just remember a lot about France with the scientific history, the École Polytechnique, a lot of Marie Curie, even though she's from Poland. There's a lot of history in France of science. And so when you go out in the streets and people, young people are told that this Green Deal is going to result in shutting down the nuclear power plants or technology, what is the response? Because this has been like your, kind of like your jewel, your history, your, and then also with your campaign on the space program, we have a sign on the college campuses that says the Green New Deal is genocide for Africa. Specifically, we say Africa because we want to really give people a sense, a visual of what this means. And people come up and say, even young people from Africa say, what do you mean? What do you mean this is genocide for Africa? And of course, we show them the map of what Africa looks like at night in terms of the electricity and what it could look like in the future. And so, you know, we told people, you know, we have people who've run for president in France talking about how the space program could be a way to develop Africa, and this is very surprising to them. Who would want to develop Africa with the space program? So I just wanted to bring that up and see if you had any thoughts.
Well, about Africa, everybody believes that I am the person who understands and defends the African people, because I said that Africa should be freed from the monetary slavery, which is French franc CFA or the Euro CFA, which associates Africa to the policy of Malthusianism of the European Union as it is. So the Africans have heard me in the campaign saying it, nobody else said it. So they believe that we are the ones who understand the history of Africa. We understand all those in the first independent states who wanted to create something else. These people have been killed, eliminated, or they failed. Some of these people, the family of these people, meet me, understand what we say. And we have this Lake Chad project. Our friend Sébastien Périmoni was in Abuja for that, in Africa. We have the Inga dams in Congo. We have the Great Lakes project, canal projects in Uganda and Rwanda and all this part around the Lake Victoria. We have many projects for Africa that can be done only if we free the world from this monetarist oligarchy and this policy of killing. Look, Africa is at, I think today, 1.2 billion people. In 2050, it should be the double. These people are going to die if we not change things. And the Africans understand very well that we are the ones really fighting for this change. Then the second part of the question. At this point, France is producing 72% of its electricity with nuclear power. Is the most advanced country in the world relative to its population and its production of electricity for nuclear power. And Ben Denniston has explained very well that if you look at all the social indicators, the life expectancy, the young bonds that survive and develop. If you look at all that, it's always associated with electricity and the development of electricity. So the jump forward of China was associated also with this production of electricity. Nuclear energy is the basis for that because it's the most dense form of producing energy, and its energy flux density is the highest. France has understood that in its recent history. It started in the 1960s, but it started in fact before, where the French said we need nuclear energy for our defense, but it would be much better if we do it also for the domestic production, for the civilian economy. So they did it. So we have that capital. We have a problem. First is that the present president and the French politicians are dealing with it. They did not want to abandon it, but they don't go into the forms for the future. So they don't go really for fusion. They are people who, in the scientific and engineering establishment, who go for fusion. They are associated with China and somehow in contact with people in the United States. So we have that for the future, but it's not let's say, a well-explained government policy. Then we have the Macron ecologist turn, who is making speeches in favor of the ecological transition. He's attacking Greta to be too much collapsologist, as they say here, but the kids are right to raise the questions and so on and so forth. He's making all these type of deals. So this creates a problem. The second problem is the nuclear establishment. The nuclear establishment did not work with the people, and they work in among themselves, and they have not established inside the country a policy of education for what nuclear energy means for the future. So I discussed with them a few years ago on how this has to be done. So the answer to me, look, we have an asset. It's the climate warming. And this would need nuclear energy because all the rest is pollutes, all the rest doesn't work, so we need nuclear energy because of this climate change and the need not to pollute. So I told them, look, but with nuclear energy, you organize industry, you organize development, and this, people would answer, it does pollute. So they would attack nuclear energy from the angle of the possibility that it has to develop. So these people at the time said, you may be right, but we won't go into that. So now it's necessary to go into that precisely. And this is what I'm saying. And also to understand that if we want to go in long trips into the outer space, we need fusion with what we are going to send there. So this is understood in France by a network of engineers, people involved in the scientific community, and we are since a long time in contact with them. It's also people involved in astrophysics, and all these people who are what Shelley defined as the shadows of the future. These people understand well what you are doing. So our challenge is to make the population understand really what it means to reach into the soul of the population, the concept that their daily life is connected to a long-term view of what the future has to be. And at this point, our Society of Friends are developing that into certain circles of the Yellow Vests and into this scientific community. We have to go much further. We are developing the idea of the possibility of a cooperation between China, France, Europe, and the United States, and Europe, and France in particular, being a kind of catalyzer or a mediator into the agreement of China, India, the United States, and Russia. Certain people understand that in France. They understand that France may have a role in the future only as a mediator, a catalyzer, but I want it more to be an inspirer. So at this point, it's a my fight. And we have won in that sense that the Glass-Steagall issue, banking separation, it's everywhere. A French magazine called Marianne has published a whole report on the financial crash, mentioning all our solutions, but without mentioning us, and adding to the process, and it shows how these people are in the compromise, adding of that the Green New Deal may be good for the United States. So, you see, this defines the situation. No coherency, no general view of what has to be done, and no understanding of what nuclear energy means really, which means the man's creative processes expressed in reality. And what this propriety, this society lacks is that an ideal can transform the society and the universe because the universe responds to what we inspire and what we accomplish. So this is something that we have to, since the level of the first moments of education. And my concern is that the French education process is collapsing. And if you look at all the inquiries about the ability to read in the world, if you look at that, France, who was among the very first 50 years ago, is now 34th, First is Russia, Singapore, then after China, Finland, Japan. So we have to understand that we have to change. And what's happening in the world is not complaining, as we do in Europe too often, about this and that, to see what we have to do for our future and the common destiny of humanity.
Daniel, New York. Jacques, nice to talk to you again. Intelligence, warfare everywhere. American public should know that. Let's take for a few seconds media. In the end of the communism in the communist countries, the media printed something, they released to the public something which was not truth. And people knew opposite is the truth. So 2 days ago, NBC put that in the media, panic in the White House. It's sure that he's concerned of White House today, but panic is somewhere else. In the communist countries, if editor for releasing the information for public go on a short vacation, and somebody else printed something which was not in the line what the government says, so he get punished. He get punished, and actually he lately, some time later, he become a member of opposition. So let's make an assumption here. Let's see. Mr. Mark Thompson is chief executive officer of New York Times. If he goes on a vacation, and maybe he comes back from vacation, but during that time he is absent there on the control, somebody else printing that exoneration of LaRouche on the first page of New York Times. He got angry and he become, in the end, a Schiller Institute member. I have a question for you. How optimistic you are that we are growing and we are really everybody taking notice what we do and what we believe in? That's my question. Thank you.
I would answer first that we should need more of the Radio Erevan spirit. It was under the Soviet system. So we need humor, and we need a devastating humor to attack, and laughter, as Rabelais said in France, to attack I can say it in French, but I will try to say it in English, the undue powers in the world, to laugh at them. So we need this destructive laughter against our enemies. And we need to inspire what would make them think about the future. If we do that, once we do one of these things, and you know it in the United States, in the field, in interventions, in public interventions, then you feel good, you feel well, and you feel like you are accomplishing something that's what you have born for. And then you become optimistic. And this optimism is in the fight. So what I think is that everybody could be transformed. Some can be transformed much earlier, and we should see who accepts the challenge to change. I was, in another existence, in the School of Public Administration in France. And there was a friend of mine who was passing the exam, the top-level exam, and he was asked, what means for you to read a book? And he said, it's a challenge to change, to be different, and to go to a higher moment in what I am going to do for my country. And he was told to change. Is that reasonable for a civil servant? So that's precisely the way the oligarchy thinks. They want to have people working for them who are just accepting not to be creative, but to be functional. And to be functional by repressing their creativity inside themselves. It's a funny thing, but what makes me optimistic is that I have broken with that, and I feel so free to have done what I did. I feel exactly the way I think that most of you feel, and certainly as Lynn felt when he was breaking the rules of the game. We discussed many times about this fact of breaking the rules of the game. And if people see you breaking the rules of the game, the best people would come with you because they say, finally, there is something truthful in the way of what I see, and I may join that. So sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it works, but it creates the conditions. And I think that in this moment of history, as usual in these moments, if a few people that would change things, and we have these few people, we are these few people, but we should ourselves not be pessimistic and believe it because we believe in the potential of humanity and in the potential of the future and not in what is it today. We are defining ourselves as people from the potential and for the high density of the mental powers.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm working to pull together an event to celebrate the International Moon Day, called by NASA, the European Space Union, and other international space administrations. So we all know that's going to be October 5th. So in the course of that, I realized that I'm doing something that is more concrete than I ordinarily do in my conversations about LaRouche, and the aspirations and the theories of theories of bringing back a bank for credit and Glass-Steagall, et cetera. So it's very exciting just having it concretized. So what hit me is coming into the city and taking the shuttle, taking the subway, and feeling like there has to be some sort of Malthusian bureaucrat behind it all if our shuttle is not going to be renewed until 2002. I realize you're from France, and this may seem very remote, but one can almost die of the temperature in the subway, 100 degrees, 110. So it occurred to me, does President Trump, who is a New Yorker, how recently has he been in the shuttle? Could he not become a champion of New York City if he would propose pouring money from the Bank of Credit into the New York City subway system? Not only that, but of course the ports that have been badly affected by the various hurricanes that we've had around our country. And so it just seems like people, not just, people that don't know about LaRouche and don't understand about money and banking and physical economy need somehow to have something more brought down to earth, excuse the term, although we want to go into space. All of these paradoxes all the time, going into space, we're being de-industrialized, Africa needs to industrialize. All of these ironies going on all the time. So it's complicated for people to pull it together. So I thought a French point of view might be useful. Thank you so much.
Well, this is a question of public equipment, and it can be done aside of a change in the general orientation of society. People who deal with things that happen to them in the subway or otherwise, for example, in Paris, you have, every time I go to our office, we go near a place where there are all about between 1,000 and 2,000 migrants abandoned, living in dirt, and a sizable part of them smoking crack. So how this could be tolerated, how this could happen. And the Chinese, when they come to France and they see Paris, for them, France is a country of romance, is a country for arts and science. So when they see Paris, they see how it could be that it's so dirty, and how it could be it's less insecure than other parts of the United States, but it's a bit insecure. How it is that there are people trying to attack us for our money. They know that the Chinese have money. Now they don't have money anymore because they pay with special devices in the handies. But how is it that it could happen? So it could happen precisely because nobody thinks into the future, and thinking into the future would do the right thing in the present. If you don't have this commitment to the future, and if you don't have these ideas, you won't do anything in the present because your mind is, as they say in French, at the level of the little small flowers, and not at the level where you have in your mind and in your commitment, the capacity to intervene. So I have many people in France asking me the same type of questions, saying, well, what do you think about currency, about, how do you call that, into parallel currencies that people organize among themselves to have their own regional or local currencies? What do you think about common gardens? What do you think about these common goods that we can develop together? So what I answer is, do it. Do it, but if you do it, don't stop at it. Don't think that it's a solution for the world and for the future. Do it as a basis to meeting people that go to an upper stage, and then to go to an upper stage, and as fast as you can do it, because what's happening in the world requires this intervention. And this is a society of friends. A society of friends, or what you have, the committees of correspondence, is to gather these people, not only to discuss about things going in, as I said, in the outer space without connection to Earth. It's things connecting the two, and having your mind involved in how constantly you should bring forth things that make people organize themselves for that. And this is what we do. Look, there are certain people. In France, we have a special type of subsidy for people that do not work. You don't have that in the United States. And what may sometimes cry when I think about the United States is that some of our best people, or good organizers, best people, have to work in Uber jobs, have to work in translations, have to work in such things. So we have, by inspiring people to win the time, to work in what's good and what we are doing, and not to work into these things. So this is what connects one's mind on what we do every day, and what inspires us to do that every day. If you think about yourself as a person whom great sons may go further than Earth. If you think about a moon village, like we have a plan in France for a moon village, one of the best things going on here. The European Space Agency is one of the few good things in Europe. So if we have all that, when we think about the people that we have, the things that we have to do every day, we do them. I do things that I have to do every day, which are not the most pleasant things. But if I see them as things that I have to do, I see things that connect me with people, and it creates an environment where it creates people that are involved into discussions about greater things, then we are accomplishing what politics means. Politics is not combination of people with self-interest or unions, is something that creates this level of common trust, and then interest and commitment for humanity, and then you do these things, thinking long. You cannot, if you think short, if you think to accomplish this thing short, it doesn't work. You have to think long. And this has been constantly what our organization, since the first day of Lyndon LaRouche, developed. Lynn always was creating the conditions where people would do the best of themselves in things that will be immediate because they would think of themselves as being in the future and doing things for that. So it means that this connection should exist at every moment of our life, and if we are truthful, it does exist. So I'm going, for example, in 2 weeks to see a group of people of another party who are disgusted with what the other party does because they are restricted to go in the field, to put posters, and to do things, to produce a garden where they produce good food, and they are fed up with that, they want something else. So they are calling me to establish a relation where they would, what they do would be connected to something of a higher form. So that's exactly the way we have to see things. And it's a point of connecting our minds with the minds of the people we work with, and being for them, because we are truthful, a kind of point of reference, and we become a reference. And this is what you are and what you could continue to do. But being this point of reference, they expect you to be always a bit further than them and a bit more cooperating with the others to build a better world.
Hello, I'm Jessica, and I really,
Hello.
Hi there. I wanted to bring up the point. I appreciate in your discussion you mentioned the synthetic economy, and now that is being propped up by the global banking institutions. And so, on that topic of the synthetic economy. I was reading an article yesterday. It was actually in global research called "The Climate and the Money Trail," and it's very related to all the discussions we've been having and the report on the UN and things like that. And so there was one part in the article discussing about Juncker, the EU Commission president. I'll just read from the article. It says, in 2018, on October 17, 2018, days following the EU agreement on the One Planet Summit, Juncker's EU signed a memorandum of understanding with Breakthrough Energy Europe, in which member corporations of Breakthrough Energy Europe will have preferential access to any funding. The members of Breakthrough Energy include Virgin Air's Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Alibaba's Jack Ma, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, HRH Prince Al Walid bin Talal, Bridgewater Associates Ray Dalio, Julian Robertson, the hedge fund giant Tiger Management, David Rubenstein, founder of the Carlyle Group, George Soros, chairman of Soros Fund Management, LLC, Masayoshi Son, founder of SoftBank Japan. So just, I was reminded back to this point that this is called the Breakthrough Energy Europe, and how, I guess, the EU has said that these are our preferential companies and groups that we're going to give funding to in terms of the new synthetic economy. So it's a connection to that. So I guess I'm interested in your stance on what this means in terms of having a group of corporations that are chosen to be the the movers into the future in terms of the synthetic economy. And yeah, I'm interested in your point in that. And I think it's critical what you talked about in terms of how Trump could break free from this synthetic economy, and what that means in terms of maybe choices of different companies, and especially in thinking in terms of technology and AI and things like that. What does it mean with certain companies being put to the forefront? Thank you.
Well, our report, CO2 reduction, is a mass murder policy designed by Wall Street and the City of London, is key to understand that. Anybody acting as an insider into this environment is engaged in something that first should not be trusted, and second is certainly destructive. So we should distinguish from that standpoint The European Union, which is an absolutely rotten institution, at this point a bureaucracy connected to the whole financial markets, to Wall Street and the City of London, and acting as a sort of stooge of these interests, and Europe. Europe is something very different. Europe is a civilization, and this civilization is represented in various ways to combining these various ways towards common policies. There are none of them at this point except the European Space Agency, which is a very good example of that. So anybody speaking about synthetic economy or having these big words is, for me, always, I see them as embezzlers. And I don't trust them at all. And if George Soros is among them, it's very clear that it smells a very, very bad, very bad smell. It's very interesting because there are people understanding it. We had a meeting at our office of diverse sovereignists in France who are trying to associate themselves. It's always difficult because these have an idea, this has no idea. But one of them intervened and said, look, the main issue today is, you said, I said, it was me, you said that man is seen as a polluter, as a looter, and as evil. It's worse, man is seen as a beast, and these people who see man as beasts are beasts. So they may have nice words, they may have way to say things, but they are beasts with a bad mouth. And this is how I see them. And I judge them. And I work against them.
The next question, just want to point out, the report is in the back of the room. CO2 reduction is a mass murder policy designed by Wall Street and the City of London. And just to say that, yes, the idea of cryptocurrency is something that was popularized through the earlier drug dealing dark web network called the Silk Road. That's how they began it. And then when they busted the guy who ran that, they began to surface this as a new technology for currencies. But it wasn't real. It was always, the whole thing from the beginning was a promotion for the purpose of attacking the dollar and sovereign currencies of sovereign nation states. So I don't want to say more about it now, but again, the report is at our table, and then those who are watching, you can get this report through Executive Intelligence Review. If you go to our site, the LaRouche PAC site, you'll also be able to get it. CO2 reduction is a mass murder policy designed by Wall Street and the City of London.
Hi, how are you? My name is Darwin Scott. And well, my question is I used to refinance mortgages back in the early 2000s, and the way that in America, the way that the mortgage lending system was set up, technically a speculative casino market, which what you were talking about, a synthetic economy, during the time when the early 2000s, before we went to war with, before we went to the Iraq War, or not the Iraq War, but before we went to war, we dropped our interest rates. And in America, in the early 2000s, if you were a homeowner and you had a 30-year fixed mortgage, the best going rate at that time was about 6.7%. Now, with the synthetic economy, they've been talking a lot about negative interest rates and bringing it down to the zero interest rate. I wanted to know, from your perspective in France, how has that affected your housing market there in France, and also how do you see the negative rates that they've been talking about as far as borrowing money and also putting money into the economy that has been disappearing? What is your whole take on that? That's something that I wanted a deeper explanation about.
Negative interest rates are a weapon of mass economic destruction. This is the way how it works. As for the housing situation in France, we are in a phase where the prices are skyrocketing. People are asked to take credit and to buy houses, and people think it's cheap. It's very low interest rates. It's 1.9, between 1.9 and 3%. It's very, very low. So people buy, and they have the impression that they become owners. What they don't see is that one day they will have to reimburse the principal, and it's creating a situation which is more controlled in France, but it's similar to the subprime situation, which is, again, happening in a certain way in the United States. So these negative interest rates, what it does, it creates a situation where people having savings are, as one times Keynes himself said, are submitted to a financial euthanasia. People, the savings, at certain points in certain banks, the deposits are with negative interest rates. This is in Switzerland, it's starting in Denmark. So it's a crazy world. You have to pay people to be lended money. It's the reverse of what should happen. So it's happening, and now we have negative interest rates in France is 0.3% more or less for 10 years. The German bond is 0.67, between 0.6 and 0.7. In Switzerland, it's almost 1%. So with all these negative rates, what it does is that maintains afloat all the zombie societies and all the zombie banks. It maintains them afloat, and it loots the savers, and it loots people who are thinking in terms of a rational economy. Of course, the French state, who is very indebted, they reconvert their past debt into new debt, and they said it costs about nothing because the interest rates are low, but there are more and more debt. So if you look at the figures, it's very clear. You see the two curves. The curve of interest rates is going down, down, down. But the curve of the debt, of the total debt, is going up, up, up. So it's a way to create an economy based more and more on debt. And I have something to add. At the same time, the conditions of wages and the conditions of income for people don't permit them to have a decent life. For example, if you look at the figures in the United States and in Europe, I think it's a bit worse in the United States, but it's about the same. If you want to buy, let's say, a car, or if you want to buy a decent housing, you need twice as more working time, about twice as more working time that you needed in 1960 or between 1960 and 1950. So what it means is that you can't work because you have no labor hours. So you go for credit. And then all the population is little by little, and not so little, made prisoner with credit. So they are all, and they are very little savings. So in France, they have savings. They are still saving, but they are going into unnecessary things like, I don't know, like gold or some asset of that sort. So it's insane. You have a whole economy who doesn't work anymore based on long-term projects, but on making speculative money, and you can invest with these negative interest rates. For example, at some point, how the stock market works. It's no more a stock market. It's controlled by algorithms. But at this point, if you see how it works at an European level with the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank would buy some securities to banks. The banks, with this money, would lend to firms. The firms and the lending is at low interest rates. With this money, the firms, the societies will buy their own stock, and they push the stock market up. And everybody does the money with the speculation, and it has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with what's happening in the real world. It's a pure synthetic operation of the financial system. And it's murderous.
Oh, very well stated.
All right, Jack, it's good to see you. This is Mike Lepic. Well,
Hi.
okay,
Hi,
let
Mike.
me see. I don't think there are very many people in the United States or even in the world who don't think that humanity is up against the wall, all right, that we're right in the middle of the most profound crisis in their lifetime, you know, anybody who's sentient. So just to give an idea, one of the people that I talked to recently who's been a longtime supporter, and he took an in-depth briefing, and he was like floored. I mean, he was absolutely floored, absolutely convinced that we were right, wanted to help us, you know, and hadn't done anything recently, but so he contributed. And then he said, how could they do this? What do they want? Right? What is it? All right? And, you know, like that, I accepted the question, you know, and I can't remember exactly what I said to it, but the more I think about it, and especially in the light of what you said today, they don't want anything. They got it. They run the show. They have been running the show. You called it by its name, controlled disintegration. This has been their policy since the 70s, explicitly. This is what their policy was. And the interesting thing is that it's like a wake-up call for all of us, because this has been their policy for humanity since, what's his name? Prometheus fought these guys, the Olympians, all the way back. You know, human beings, we don't need them, we don't want them, right? So the major opposition they've had in the post-war period, other than the leaders that they assassinated, was Lyndon LaRouche. All right, and he offered the IDB immediately after they took the dollar off of gold and set their floating exchange rate system into motion, and it took off. 77 world leaders of nations picked it up. It was adopted by the non-aligned movement, all right? There wasn't any problem. The leaders heard reason, and it was in coherence with their interests as human beings, so they adopted it. They did it, all right? And then, just to give you an idea, you got to get rid of your fantasies about how the world really works. And I obviously, I urge reading Lyndon LaRouche. However, so like, for example, get the Congress to do it, right? The Congress, right? So in the 70s, we fought for fusion energy development. 1980, we got the Congress to pass a bill for a crash program for fusion energy. It was adopted. It's the law. They didn't do it. Why didn't they do it? The structures of sin. They run the show. The economy is run by them. The higher up you get, the more degenerate you become, because you're working on the premise that the motive of life is self-aggrandizement, right? And like when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of our collaborators wrote a book, and he goes into the book and he says, the only thing that held us back from being as degenerate as the West was that we had a so-called communist system. So we had to provide health care, we had to, you know, do education, right? The minute the system falls down, all deals are off. Now it's, you know, let's make a deal. You know, they're working hand in glove now, all right? So now here's where I am now in terms of thinking about this. It's no longer hidden. It's overt. Nobody can hide from it. So what are you going to tell them? You know what they want, which is they got it. They don't need anything. They need you dead or brain dead, all right? So what hope do you have, right? You can't pass legislation. You got a president who's for what you want, and they say they're going to impeach him in a month. They don't care whether, I believe, they don't care whether they can impeach him in a month. What they want to do is stop any policy discussion in the United States. In the Congress, you know, you're going to worry about impeachment. In the White House, you're going to be worried about being impeached. So the United States comes to a halt. The world comes to a halt. on this. Just paralyze everything as long as we can do it. So my proposal, and I'd like to hear what you think of this, is read LaRouche. He made a creative, think of this, because we're asking, and he's been very overt about it, he's asking everybody to be creative. Go out, intervene, talk, get it going. In the late 40s, early 50s, Lyndon LaRouche made a fundamental discovery, breakthrough at the frontier of science. An absolute breakthrough. The moment he made that breakthrough, there was only one human being who knew it. And he went out with it, and he started organizing for it. And I will suggest to you, at this moment in history, Lyndon LaRouche is the authority on human science, all right? So if you want to know the truth, you got to read Lyndon LaRouche. You got to make discoveries. You got to provoke other people to make discoveries. That's what they don't want, all right? So, like I end up, my punchline is always the same. LaRouche founded the Executive Intelligence Review. It's not enough to subscribe to the EIR, right? Only Russia reads the EIR, evidently. Everybody's got to read. And the new paradigm, which is what we're calling for, is a personal dialogue among those of us alive today with Lyndon LaRouche. You're measuring your behavior against the greatest mind of our time. That's what you got to do. That's the new paradigm, right? A man is imago viva Dei, in the living image of God. That's who we are. So.
Let's just say something about exoneration here for a minute. Jacques, let me just say this here. We are going to be doing in the next days, and then in about 2 weeks, a set of days of action, probably on October 8th and 10th. We haven't exactly determined it, but this is something we discussed this morning. With respect to the impeachment, let's be clear about something. The model they're using for impeachment is the rocket docket that they used against Lyndon LaRouche to convict him after we had successfully had a mistrial in Boston. And then a trial was then started on October 14th, an indictment which was 2 days after Lynn had made his famous speech on the Kempinski Hotel, in which he had called for the unification of Germany and had stated that Berlin would become its capital, which seemed to come completely out of the blue. Now, everybody who remembers that speech remembers where they were when they heard the speech, because it seemed to make no sense whatsoever. When he gave that speech, he was indicted 2 days later. He was convicted by December and was in jail by January. And the Berlin Wall was down by November, and a year after that, Berlin was the capital. Now, I say that because, just to say before Jacques responds, it's true that they have no capability per se of removing Donald Trump from office, but they do have a capability of removing the American people from the presidency. That they can do. That is up to what the American people do in response to the call for impeachment. And where the exoneration comes in, and why we say that you have to go with that and feature Lynn's case, is because everything being done around Donald Trump is just taken from the template around Lyndon LaRouche. Just very simple. It's not a question, in other words, of whether all these things will work. It's a question of people understanding in America what LaRouche's role has been, both in terms of his enemies, most importantly, but also in terms of his ideas, which are ideas that people can use right now. That's what we're trying to do. So on the various fronts, that's what we're going to be doing. And one of the things that we want you to help us do is to have people make statements about the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. They can be video statements or written statements or they can be single-line assertions. But that's something that I think we could talk a little bit more about a little later. But I just wanted to insert that here, since there will be days of action, probably, as we say, October 8th and 10th. And you'll hear more about that in the next week. So, Jacques, I'm sorry I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to interpolate that.
No, thanks a lot. So what I may add is that the oligarchy is in a such destructive phase that it's visible. Everybody here, everybody I think also in the United States, is talking about the crash to come. It's a common word now. When Lynn announced it in 2007, it was something that a very, very few people would believe or think about. Today it's throughout the place. So how is it that there is not a revolution against these people that are a destructive force identified as such? There is not a revolution because what they have managed to do, and it's through this green ideology, is a culture of death. They have promoted a culture of death. This is what a pope attacked a few years ago. It was John Paul II. He said it's a culture of death which is our worst enemy. And you see that with the youngsters. They are imposed this sense that they would have no future. So these kids become crazy in their minds because they believe that there will be no future. And then the extremely coward leaders would be, out of fear, would go or interest, would go with what they say, or adapt what they say, or adapt what the oligarchy tells them to say. So you have that. In the population, there is this fear of death because you have a whole culture, it's a culture of death, which imposed that reality is sense perception. So if you identify your physical body and to sense perception, you fear death, obviously. And this fear of death paralyzes you to fight against the oligarchy because you are at the risk of your life. So it's clear that today, even if there was in Europe, for example, a war, people won't risk their lives for the country or for what they believe in. There is this fear of death promoted throughout the society. So what Lynn answers to that is the notion of immortality. And immortality is not a notion, of course. Immortality is a reality. Because man, what it gives to the future generations, what he works for, is something that is going to remain for the whole future. And even in a very remote period, if the humanity to come has forgotten us, they would work on the basis that we have done for them before. So that's what would inspire people to fight. And that's why the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche and his ideas, because on top of what he wrote and what he said, you should see him, he's a very extremely lively person, enjoyable, lively, who is, he is not restraining himself by special personal interest. He is interested in making people be more acquainted to the, let's say, I would say, to the best of them, and to act on the basis of the best of them. If you do that, if the exoneration process of Lynn works, then it will be devastating in the United States, because I think that there is a response in the American population to that. They hide them very deep in themselves, because out of fear, but it will come out when they would see that in any case they are threatened, and it's a mandate inside themselves to go for that. If you should present that not as something which comes as a duty, as Schiller said, it should come as like something of a higher form of humanity which creates inside a person a sense of a more advanced sense of joy to be alive. And if you are joyful, if you are happy to be alive, you don't fear death. And that's the point. That's the main point today. And if you look at the poor Greta, she is so sad to be alive. She is so angry. She is so inside herself. She knows probably at some point that she's playing a role. So if you see that and that promoted, that's what we have to fight. Not the person itself, but what is promoted in the whole population. And this is our fight for the exoneration. The exoneration should be something alive, permanent, and at every moment of your life, you should think, how would I do if I was what Lynn was? And you are Lynn if you think like that at a certain point. With a certain form, you are not fully, you have part of Lynn inside yourself. It's a big polemics at the time of Nicolas de Cusa on the presence of God in the world. Certain people would say it's immanent, it's in all things. Others said, we say, no, he's above and he's controlling. And Cusa would say, you have part of him and you have the opportunity to have part of him, and this portion could grow into you if you do the right thing. So it's the same for what you do for humanity. You have this commitment to humanity, and you go in atonement with what Lynn has done and with his writings. And that's a work you should do in a social way, because if you do it alone, it doesn't work. It has to be social, and that's what's called politics. That was called the committees of correspondence, and you should have targets going each time. What a great philosopher said, it's Eckhart, he was one of the predecessors of Cusa. He said, look for yourself and try to find out who you are. And once you find, go a step above and change.
Hello, Jacques. This is Alvin. So this past Wednesday, during a week of activity of deployments around the UN area to confront the green genocide policy, and as well, so for some of those genocidalists, making contact with them, but in my mind, even more important, being out there sometime and addressing the population. It was, I think, very useful and effective, particularly a couple of conversations that I had in the limited time that I was out there that I thought struck differently than previous deployments I'd been on. But then the following day, this was Wednesday, Thursday night, we were on the national call. And Barbara introduces that we now have in written form some plain facts bearing on impeachment. One of the things that was relevant to the deployment on the confronting the green genocide policy was the relationship between the looming crash and those financial figures that were selling this crap to the people, the billionaires that want to so-called help them with this. But of course, then there's the relationship to impeachment, which is what Barbara, her discussion and the paper I have in front of me now was addressing. And you see this thing now, we were told that Mueller was a political hitman back in 2017, and if we let him, he would do his job and finish Trump off. This organization intervened, as well as some other key people in the country, a few, and that was derailed. But we were also told that the enemy would not stop. And indeed, that's the case. However, the Democrats and those few other Republicans that are aligned with them have really gone flight forward and off the deep end with this stuff now. And my sense in conversations with people that are not Trump supporters is that this has just gone too far, that even they know that there's a nothing burger here, but it's also very dangerous, and that the institution of the presidency, not Trump, is what's at stake. So the idea is echoing throughout me from listening to Barbara's talk, is that people can realize that there's a limit to the tyrant's power. And so that this type of flight forward assault on the institution of the presidency to protect their dying system is a tremendous opening now for people that would otherwise not be open. That and the fact that there's a physical collapse that they cannot deny, certainly in New York. and a cost of living. An area of the Bronx that I lived in recently, a one-bedroom apartment that was $1,000 is now $1,700 a month for working-class people. And the area is actually disintegrating and becoming more and more ghetto. So all of these factors come in, and then you see these either stupid or insane people trying to front an argument that, thanks to Barbara's paper, really gives us a position to lay out facts and have people think. But that their overall sense is that there's something really wrong, and please talk to me. And that's what happened with a couple of the conversations I had. That's in essence what came out. So I wanted to express that, and like to hear what your response is to what's going on here in the USA and New York in general.
It's going on in the whole world. What a French so-called sociologist wrote is that there is a secession of the elites against the people. And the elites are, in a sense, in a secession because they create their own environment, their own world, and they think that they can survive by destroying the people. It's exactly what's happening. So the thing is visible, and in particular what you said in the housing. You have the same phenomenon here. Nobody, no young couple, even in a good social position, can afford an apartment inside Paris. It's too expensive. So they have to go further and further from the place where they work. And it's crazy, it's insane, because the proximity of the place where you work and the place where you live was a kind of human right in the past. So now all these things has been destroyed, and the gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in the provinces, to go to their jobs or to go to buy things that are necessary for a daily life, they had to take their cars, and with the increase in the gas price, in the gasoline price, they could not do it, they could not afford it. So you have a destruction of the social fiber of society. That's what you were talking about. It's a destruction of the social fiber of society. So in that sense, people, if they get a sense that to believe in themselves, to believe in what they can do, they would work and would do things with us. But you have to create in them this sense that they are precious human beings that can create a better world. And today, most of the people are afraid because they see the enemies that they would raise against them if they do that, or they think that they are not good enough to do it. So the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche creates this sense that what was done by a man was done for all Americans, and was done to really forever, in at least 2 generations, to absolutely eliminate all this insanity of segregation. And look, if you look at the segregation, and you look at the slavery, you had the slavery, the physical slavery in the past, but today you have the mental slavery, and it's a form of slavery. In the past years, we had discussed that with Amelia Robinson. You have this mental slavery, and that the Lynn exonerations mean to think, to work on what he wrote and what other people wrote with him, and to see how it frees you from the mental slavery. And when you are free, you cannot stand the world as it is. And you have this response. I agree. In France, we have the same thing. We have a better response from people. And if you look at it and you have the sense of an accomplishment of doing things together, it works. Definitely it works today. And in the meantime, you can have a good laughter against your enemies because they are murderers, but ridiculous murderers.
Okay, Jacques, we're going to be drawing this to a conclusion, and as a way of having your last response, I want to talk about something. This is a book that was recently published in America. It's called Forgotten: The Untold Story of D-Day's Black Heroes at Home and at War. Now, as people here know, and as Jacques also knows, Bill Monroe attended our meetings here for many years, and he died this past August, just on the eve, actually, of the liberation of Paris. Died on August 18th, I believe. And what happened was that prior to his death, he had expressed to several of us his intent to live past D-Day, because he was one of the people that landed on Omaha Beach and Utah Beach also that day. The book mentions, this is a story about a particular battalion, the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, which was a unit of black American soldiers. It says one member of the 320th Battalion would be nominated for the Medal of Honor, but it was an award he would never receive. The nation's highest decoration was not given to black soldiers during World War II. Now, Mr. Monroe told many stories to us about World War II. If you rode with him, and Bruce Todd and others know about some of the things he told us. But one of the stories he told us, and he shared that with Jacques, was about his having had the occasion to have dinner with Charles de Gaulle. Now, why this is relevant is he was in a segregated unit, and people in the unit used to talk about the following. There were people that made sure they didn't not go to the Second World War, because their point was, we're supposed to fight for rights that we don't have at home for people across the world. And not only that, among the troops, if you captured German troops, the German troops were allowed to sit in sections of the mess hall and so on that the black troops couldn't sit in. So Monroe's response to this was, well, I have a bigger vision than that. I'm a citizen of the United States. This is my country. I'm fighting for my country, and I know what the country is. The country is what I choose to make the country to be. And so what happened was, because Mr. Monroe happened to speak French, and he was one of the GIs that was there, he took up a relationship, a friendship, with the mayor of a certain town, which Jacques will tell you a little bit about, because what happened was Mr. Monroe had told us this story many times, and we got in touch with the mayor, thanks to Jacques, the present mayor of that town. Jacques went down, and he'll tell you the story. And on June 5th, we visited Bill Monroe in the hospital, and Jacques got on the phone and talked to him. And we made it clear, and I guess I'll let Jacques tell you the rest of the story, but the reason I'd like to hear Jacques respond and give his conclusion on this point is because there's a different conception of mankind that we fight for, that we represent in this room. And he said before, you know, if it's too good to be true, no, the good has to be true. And that's what Bill Monroe represented and recognized. So he ended up, despite segregation, despite the fact that he could have been killed on the beach fighting for a country that had not given him the rights he deserved, he ended up having a personal discussion with the mayor and with Charles de Gaulle, which shows you something about ironies in history. So, Jacques, I'd like you to just say a few things just in terms of now, give us the kind of message we would need to go forward from here as to what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks in particular and in general in our campaign.
Factually, very simply, I went to see the present mayor. I had talked to him on the telephone. He knew me because of the presidential campaign. He did not vote for me, but he said he had appreciated my campaign, and I told him about Bill Monroe's story. So he said, come to see me. So I went to see him, and before that, he had sent a message to Bill Monroe, but I don't know if it arrived properly. So then I went to see him, and we discussed about what happened in Sainte-Mère-Église. It's this city. You have still on the church a dummy of a parachute because an American soldier was parachuted on Sainte-Mère the day of the freeing of the city, and he's fall on the church, and he was on the top of the church. He could not open his parachute, so he was blocked on top of the church with all the Germans around fighting. So that's a very famous story in France. So we discussed it with the mayor, we discussed about Bill, and he said, I have a medal for him, I would give you this medal, and you should send the medal to him. So he said, I would send also a letter. So he wrote a letter for Bill. I haven't seen the letter, but I know that Bill got a medal and the letter. So I think this is a sense of how much better than in all politicians speak, how a French-American friendship could be established, as well as a French-Russian friendship on the other side. Because in World War II, you had this sense that people get together to fight against evil. And after the war, Roosevelt died, de Gaulle had to leave because he was unable, or they prevent him from ruling the country. So all the people that won World War II in the West were lose power. So this is a sad story, but at the same time, it's something that we have in mind what happened before, what the freeing of France and the freeing of Europe. We have that in mind as something that would move us today. And I think this story is very revealing, because I can add another thing. The wife of this mayor in 1945 was interviewed by American journalists, and she went to the cemetery. His husband was not there, and she went to the cemetery where all the Americans were buried before being put in other cemeteries. So all the people were regrouped here, the bodies were there. And she went there and she put flowers on the grave of Roosevelt's son, who was there. And she had pictures in Life magazine, and she was in the first page of Life magazine at the time. So it's like this that Sainte-Mère-l'Église became a symbol. So it should be much more than a symbol, it should be a reality today. And with this thing, with these memories in our minds, we should transmit it to our sons and grandsons and do something for the future in the same way that these soldiers risked their lives, put their lives at stake, and a lot of them died, for something for the future. Not for them, not for their property, but for something which is, in a way, the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness for the population, for the future, and for humanity. So I think if we have that in mind, today we intervene against this horror that's prevailing in the West, and we change the world for the better, and we build a better world for the future. And I think that this is a commitment in its own way for every nation, on every language, on every form of language, connecting the unity of humanity in a diversity of motions towards this unity. And we have that, and the unity is in the stars. In the stars we have our future, and also in the stars we have our human rights that are written there, and we should bring them back on earth to fight in our everyday life. So this is the message.
Well, Jacques, I happen to have the text of the letter because I made a photograph of it, and I will read it to you since.
Oh, good.
Okay, and so this is the letter from the present mayor of Sainte-Mère-l'Église, Mr. Monroe, and it was dated the 18th of July. And we did receive it, and it was received just in time before he became fully unconscious. Mr. Monroe, I know you are a veteran of the Second World War. I know you were at Sainte-Mère-Église and that you knew Alexander Renaud, my famous predecessor. On behalf of the people of Sainte-Mère-Église, I want to thank you for your job accomplished in 1944, which allowed us to free ourselves from Nazism. We had great festivities for the 75th D-Day. That was this past June 6th. I know that your health did not allow you to be present. That's why I want to send you this letter to tell you that, and then this is underlined, the inhabitants of Sainte-Mère-Église have not forgotten. Respect and gratitude, peace is precarious, we must not forget its price. That's the text. And when it was presented for Mr. Monroe by State Assemblyman, Gordon Johnson of Bergen County. So again, I'd like everybody to join me in thanking Jacques once again for his presentation today.
Thank you to all of you.
Okay, and so this is the conclusion of our webcast section. We have a couple of things to announce to people afterwards. But on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to thank everybody for coming today, and we'll see you again next week.